Black boy saves CIA chief and took her home. Next day, he was in police lockup. The rain fell hard on the streets of Washington, D.C. as 13-year-old Jamal Jones hurried home from his part-time job at the corner store. His sneakers splashed in puddles as he pulled his hoodie tighter against the cold. It was already dark, and he had promised his grandmother he wouldn't be out late. Just as he turned down a dimly lit alley to take a shortcut, Jamal heard the sound of scuffling feet and muffled voices. He froze in his tracks, heart pounding. His instincts told him to turn and run, but curiosity kept him rooted to the spot. He peered around the corner and saw two large men wrestling with a woman, trying to force her into a black van. "Help! Somebody please!" the woman screamed, her voice trembling with fear. Jamal's eyes darted around, looking for someone else, anyone who might step in. But the street was deserted. His mind raced. He wasn't big or strong, but he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He spotted a loose brick on the ground, picked it up, and with all his strength, hurled it at one of the men. The brick struck the man's shoulder, making him grunt in pain and loosen his grip. "Hey, leave her alone!" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to sound braver than he felt. The other man turned toward Jamal, furious, and started advancing. Jamal's heart sank. What had he just gotten himself into? But before the man could reach him, the woman, now partially free, kneed the other attacker in the stomach and grabbed a metal pipe from the ground. Between her sudden resistance and Jamal's distraction, the men cursed and retreated, jumping into the van and speeding off. The woman staggered, breathing heavily, her hair disheveled and face pale. Jamal hesitated, unsure if he should approach her. She turned to him, her piercing blue eyes locking onto his. You saved me," she said, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "I just did what anyone else would have done," Jamal mumbled, shuffling his feet. "No," she said firmly. "Most people wouldn't. What's your name?" "Jamal," he said, still feeling awkward under her intense gaze. She extended a hand. "I'm Sarah Kane." Jamal didn't recognize the name, but Sarah Kane wasn't just any woman. She was the deputy director of the CIA, and the men who had tried to abduct her were professional operatives sent by a foreign intelligence agency. Sarah was too shaken to get back to her safe house alone, so Jamal insisted on walking her to safety. He didn't ask too many questions, sensing she wasn't ready to explain. She thanked him again and asked for his address, promising to repay him. The next morning, Jamal woke up to the sound of loud banging on the door. His grandmother shuffled to open it, only to be met by two police officers. "Jamal Jones?" one of them asked sternly. Jamal came out of his room, confused. "That's me. You're under arrest," the officer said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "For what?" Jamal stammered, his stomach dropping. "Assault and robbery. We received a report that you attacked two men and stole from them." Jamal's mouth fell open in shock. "What? No, I didn't." Before he could explain, the officers hauled him away, ignoring his grandmother's protests. In the police station, Jamal sat in a cold cell, his head in his hands. He couldn't believe what was happening. He had done the right thing, and now he was being punished for it. Who would believe him? Meanwhile, Sarah Kane was sitting in a classified CIA briefing when she received a text on her personal phone. She glanced at it and froze. It was a message from Jamal's grandmother, who had found Sarah's card in Jamal's jacket. "Jamal's been arrested. Please help." Sarah stood up abruptly, startling her colleagues. "I have to go," she said, already heading for the door. She didn't know how, but she was going to make this right. Sarah Kane sped through the streets of D.C., her mind racing as fast as her car. She hadn't expected to hear from Jamal so soon, let alone under these circumstances. How could this happen? The boy had saved her life. There was no way she was going to let him take the fall for something he didn't do. Arriving at the precinct, Sarah strode inside, her heels clicking sharply on the tiled floor. The officers at the desk barely glanced up until she pulled out her badge. "CIA, I need to see Jamal Jones. Now," she demanded, her voice cold and authoritative. The officer on duty hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Of course, ma'am. He's in holding. Right this way." Sarah was led to the holding area where Jamal sat on a bench, looking small and defeated. His face lit up with a mix of relief and confusion when he saw her. "Miss Kane?" he asked, standing up as she approached. "I told you to call me Sarah," she said, a small smile softening her otherwise serious expression. "Don't worry, Jamal. I'm going to get you out of here." She turned to the officer who had accompanied her. "Why is he here? What are the charges?" The officer looked uncomfortable. "We received a report last night. 2 men claimed this kid assaulted them and stole their wallets. Their descriptions matched." Sarah interrupted him sharply. "Those men were attempting to abduct me. Jamal intervened and saved my life. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with here?" The officer blinked, taken aback. "Abduction? Ma'am, we weren't informed of any of this." "Of course you weren't. It's classified," Sarah snapped. "I want those so-called victims brought in for questioning immediately, and I want Jamal released now." The officer hesitated, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Sarah pulled out her phone and made a call. Within minutes, the station was buzzing with activity. Federal agents arrived, and the atmosphere shifted. Jamal watched in awe as Sarah took control of the situation. It was like something out of a movie. As the agents worked to identify the men who had framed Jamal, Sarah turned to him. "You're going to be okay," she said firmly. "But I need you to tell me everything you remember about last night. Did you see the license plate on the van? Anything unusual about the men?" Jamal nodded, his confidence returning as he realized he wasn't alone. He described everything in detail: the van's partial license plate, the scar on one man's face, the foreign accent of the other. Sarah listened carefully, her mind piecing together the puzzle. By the time the federal agents tracked down the 2 men, it was clear this was no ordinary mugging. The men were operatives working for a rogue international agency, and their target had been Sarah herself. The plan to frame Jamal was a desperate attempt to divert attention, but Sarah wasn't about to let them get away with it. She personally oversaw their arrest, ensuring the charges against Jamal were dropped. When Jamal was finally released, he stood outside the precinct with Sarah, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said quietly. "You don't have to thank me," Sarah replied. "You did the right thing when it mattered most. Not many people would have had the courage to do what you did." Jamal smiled, but his expression grew serious. "What happens now? Are they going to come after you again?" Sarah hesitated. "It's possible, but I've dealt with people like them before. What matters is that you're safe now." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with another urgent message. She glanced at it and sighed. "Listen, Jamal, there's more to this than I can explain right now, but I owe you one. If you ever need anything, you call me, okay?" She handed him a sleek black card with nothing but her name and a private number. Jamal nodded, clutching the card tightly. He didn't fully understand who Sarah Kane was or why those men had been after her, but he knew one thing for sure: his life had changed forever. As Sarah drove away, Jamal walked back home, his mind buzzing with questions. He had no idea that this was just the beginning of a much larger adventure. Jamal walked into his small apartment, his grandmother anxiously waiting by the door. The moment she saw him, she wrapped him in a tight hug, her hands trembling. "Are you okay, baby? What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine, Nana," Jamal said softly, but his mind was still racing. He didn't want to worry her with the details, so he just said, "It was all a big misunderstanding." Miss Kane straightened everything out. His grandmother nodded, her relief evident. But as Jamal sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the sleek black card in his hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah Kane sat in a secure CIA safe house, reviewing the files her team had compiled on the men who had attacked her. Their connections ran deeper than she had expected. Ties to a powerful international network that specialized in espionage, sabotage, and worse. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from her superior, Director Hargrove. "Sarah, we've confirmed their identities. They were working for Black Serpent," he said, his voice low. Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. Black Serpent was one of the most dangerous covert organizations in the world, known for operating in the shadows and targeting high-level intelligence officials. "Why would they risk grabbing me on U.S. soil?" she asked. "Because you're getting too close," Hargrove replied. "That last op you ran in Eastern Europe, it shook them. We think they're trying to send a message. But it's not just about you anymore." "What do you mean?" Hargrove hesitated. "They know about the boy, Jamal. They've likely identified him as a loose end." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Jamal had no idea what he was caught up in, and now his life was in danger because of her. "I'm not going to let anything happen to him," Sarah said firmly. "You'd better move quickly," Hargrove warned. "We intercepted some chatter. Black Serpent might already have someone in the area. Sarah ended the call and leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. Jamal was just a kid, and he had risked everything to save her. She owed him more than a simple thank you. She grabbed her car keys and headed out. If Black Serpent was coming for Jamal, she needed to get to him first. Back at Jamal's apartment, Jamal sat on his bed, staring at the card. He thought about the look in Sarah's eyes when she had told him he could call her. There was something she wasn't telling him, something bigger than the fight in the alley. Before he could dwell on it further, there was a loud knock at the door. His grandmother, who had been folding laundry, frowned. Who could that be at this hour? She muttered, heading to the door. Jamal followed her, his instincts telling him something was wrong. As she opened the door, two men in black suits stood on the other side. "Can I help you?" his grandmother asked cautiously. One of the men smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, ma'am. We're here to speak with Jamal Jones." Jamal froze. His grandmother turned to him, confused. "Do you know these men?" Before he could respond, the second man stepped forward, pulling something from his pocket. "Wait!" a voice shouted from the hallway. Sarah Kane appeared, her gun drawn and pointed at the men. "Step away from the door," she ordered. The men exchanged glances, then one of them reached for his waistband. Sarah didn't hesitate. She fired a warning shot into the wall, making them back off. "Jamal, get down!" she yelled. Jamal grabbed his grandmother and pulled her to the floor as chaos erupted. One of the men bolted down the hallway, while the other lunged at Sarah. She fought him off, slamming him into the doorframe before pinning him to the ground. By the time backup arrived, the second man was gone, but Sarah had managed to subdue the first. "Are you okay?" she asked Jamal as agents swarmed the building. He nodded, still shaken. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Sarah hesitated, then said, "I'll explain everything. But right now, you and your grandmother need to come with me. It's not safe here anymore." Jamal and his grandmother packed a few essentials, still stunned by the sudden turn of events. As they followed Sarah to her car, Jamal couldn't help but glance back at the apartment building, wondering if he'd ever see it again. "Where are we going?" he asked as they pulled onto the highway. "To a safe place," Sarah said, her eyes scanning the road for any signs of a tail. "But why are they after me?" Jamal pressed. Sarah glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Because you got involved in something much bigger than either of us realized. And now, they think you're a threat." Jamal's heart sank. He had just wanted to help. Now his whole life had been turned upside down. As they drove into the night, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Sarah drove cautiously through the empty streets, her focus split between the road ahead and the danger lurking behind. Jamal sat silently in the back seat, his grandmother holding his hand tightly. The fear on her face mirrored the uncertainty in his heart. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a secluded cabin deep in the woods, a CIA safe house equipped with high level. Sarah ushered them inside, locking the doors behind her. "We'll be safe here for now," she said, placing a gun on the table. "But we don't have much time. They'll regroup and come for you again." Jamal finally broke his silence. "Miss Kane, Sarah, why? Why are they coming after me? I'm nobody." Sarah knelt in front of him, her blue eyes steady. "Jamal, you did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You saved me, and in doing so, you disrupted their plan. They see you as a loose end, someone who could expose their operation. But I don't know anything," Jamal protested. "That doesn't matter to them," Sarah said grimly. "They're not just trying to silence you. They're trying to send a message. Anyone who stands against them will pay the price." Jamal looked down, his mind racing. This wasn't the life he wanted. He was just a kid from the neighborhood trying to survive. How had it come to this? Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and cursed under her breath. "They've tracked us. We don't have much time. What do we do?" Jamal's grandmother asked, her voice trembling. Sarah stood, her resolve hardening. "We fight." Minutes later, the sound of engines echoed through the forest. Black SUVs pulled up outside the cabin, and men in black tactical gear began to surround the property. Jamal peeked through a crack in the window and felt his stomach drop. "They're here," he whispered. Sarah handed him a small device. "Jamal, listen carefully. This is a secure transmitter. If anything happens to me, use it to contact the number on the card I gave you. They'll know what to do." "What do you mean if anything happens?" Jamal asked, panic creeping into his voice. I mean, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you, Sarah said firmly. She positioned herself by the front door, gun in hand, as the first wave of attackers moved in. Shots rang out, shattering the stillness of the night. Sarah's training kicked in, and she expertly held off the assailants. But the sheer number of them was overwhelming. Jamal's grandmother clutched him tightly, whispering prayers as the chaos unfolded. Jamal's heart pounded as he realized Sarah couldn't hold them off alone. Then he saw a back door, left slightly ajar in the rush to secure the cabin. "Nana, we have to go," Jamal said, pulling her toward the exit. "But what about her?" his grandmother asked, glancing at Sarah. "She'll catch up," Jamal said, his voice shaky. "We have to trust her." They slipped out into the forest. Hours later, as dawn broke, Jamal and his grandmother stumbled onto a road where a black SUV, with tinted windows, pulled up beside them. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a man in a suit. "You must be Jamal," the man said. "Miss Kane sent us." Reluctantly, Jamal climbed into the vehicle, clutching the transmitter Sarah had given him. His grandmother followed, her face etched with worry. "What about Sarah?" Jamal asked. The man's face was grim. "She's alive, but she stayed behind to make sure you got out safely." Jamal slumped back in his seat, guilt and gratitude swirling in his chest. Weeks later, Jamal and his grandmother were relocated to a new city under CIA protection. Life began to settle, though the memories of that night haunted him. One day, a package arrived for him. Inside was a letter from Sarah. "Jamal, you showed bravery and heart when it mattered most. Never forget that. The world needs people like you, people who do the right thing, even when it's hard. Stay strong, and don't let fear define you." Sarah. Along with the letter was a small pin with the CIA emblem, a quiet reminder of everything they had been through. The moral of the story. The story of Jamal and Sarah teaches us that courage and kindness can change lives, even when the odds seem impossible. Doing the right thing can inspire others and create ripples of hope, but it also reminds us that standing up for what's right often comes with challenges and sacrifices. True bravery isn't about being fearless, it's about acting in the face of fear. Knowing the difference you make can shape the future.